Hello students, my name is Iqbal Singh and I'm the faculty for Political Science and International Relations at Vajiram and Ravi. In this video, I'm going to discuss with you relevance of neighborhood in India's foreign policy making. I hope you all are aware that it is one of the most important topics in the PSIR syllabus and has also been one of the most favorite areas of UPSC, and UPSC has been asking multiple questions on India's relationship with its South Asian neighbors. However, whenever we try to understand India's relationship with its South Asian neighbors, as you all must be very well aware, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar, China, though this obviously is a neighborhood which has opportunities for India also and challenges for India as well. So whenever we try to study the relationship of India with its neighbors, first of all, it is very important to understand what is the relevance of neighborhood in India's foreign policy making. So in this particular video, we'll try and understand the relevance. Forget India for a minute. You must also understand that we'll talk about, of course, we will have a discussion on India as a neighborhood, but neighborhood anywhere. Any country in the world, you can pick up any country in the world. For any country, neighborhood has always been a very important aspect of its foreign policy making. In fact, we have learned this lesson from history. History has taught us this lesson that neighboring countries and a country's relationship with its neighbors plays a very important role in a country's foreign policy making and also plays a very important role in a country fulfilling its national interest and its global aspirations. I will give you the example of world wars. You all must be very well aware that before the two world wars, the majority of the world powers were in Europe. Europe used to dominate the entire world. However, Europe became a conflict zone and the European countries started fighting, fought these world wars with each other, World War I and World War II. In fact, during both these world wars, the major conflict zone was the continent of Europe. Now, because of these unending problems between European countries, after these two world wars, European countries have lost that global status which they used to enjoy earlier. And USA, countries like USA has emerged as a superpower. After the end of Second World War, we saw US emerging as a superpower. There may be many reasons why US has emerged as a superpower, but one of the reasons was that USA was geographically isolated from the conflict zone. And the conflict zone during both world wars was majorly the continent of Europe. So USA was geographically isolated from the conflict zone and the immediate neighborhoods of US were more stable and peaceful. It had peaceful, cordial relations with its neighbors like Canada or even for that matter, certain countries like Mexico. So it had no major problems in its own neighborhood. That is the reason why USA was able to focus entirely on its own development and own growth, and therefore was able to shine at the global level and emerge as a superpower. If we just imagine for a second that if US was also in Europe and was part of the conflict, was in the middle of the conflict zone, then it would have not been possible for USA to emerge as a superpower the way it has emerged. So neighborhood, whether you have a peaceful neighborhood, whether you have a stable neighborhood, whether you have a friendly neighborhood, or you have a conflictual neighborhood, or you have unending wars with your neighborhood, all these things matter a lot in a country's global aspirations and in order to also, and while also making the foreign policy of the country. Similarly, coming down to India, for India also, India has global aspirations, as you all know very well. India certainly wants to become a credible global power. But these global aspirations cannot be fulfilled until and unless we do not have good relations, stable relations, cooperative relations with our neighboring countries. Neighboring countries would play a very important role. I would like to quote Atal Bihari Vajpayee here. Atal Bihari Vajpayee had once said, our honorable former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee had once very popularly said, "You can change friends but not neighbors." In this particular quote, former Prime Minister Vajpayee is here trying to say that, in international politics, friends and enemies will come and go. Friends and enemies will change. For example, during Second World War, America had used nuclear weapons against Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, today, if you see, America and Japan are military alliance partners. So friends and enemies will change, and you can even choose friends and enemies, but you can't change your neighbors. You can't choose neighbors. Neighbors is a geographical reality. Neighborhood is a geographical reality which cannot be undone, which is irreversible. The neighbors which you have, they will always remain your neighbors. You may like them, you may not like them, you may have a good relationship with them, you may not have a good relationship with them. You can either cooperate with them or have continuous wars with them. It is all up to you. You have to learn to live with your neighbors. And for the prosperity of the nation, for fulfilling the global aspirations of a nation, it would be preferable to have good cooperative relationship with the neighbors and also to have control and influence in your neighborhood. So this is what former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee is trying to say here. He had very popularly said this: you can change friends, but you can't change neighbors. Therefore, you have to learn to live with your neighbors. So in that particular context, we must try and understand now what is the relevance of neighborhood in India's foreign policy making. And before I do that, I would also like to tell you that in our institute here in Vajiram and Ravi, we try to make it as easy as possible for our students to ace the exam. Therefore, we give them detailed, elaborate, typed notes in our classes in the form of handouts and booklets. And these notes have been prepared from a vast reading list which is there for the PSIR syllabus. And this helps our students prepare in the best possible manner. And in this particular video also, I will use one of our handouts, which we do give to our students to explain relevance of neighborhood in foreign policy making. And as a matter of fact, I would also attach this handout with the YouTube video, and you can also download a copy of it and therefore prepare this particular topic. Now moving on, like I've told you, India's neighborhood relations are very important in India's foreign policy. In fact, it has far-reaching consequences for India. Whether India will have a stranglehold in South Asia, control and influence in South Asia, will only be dependent on what is the status of India's relationship with its neighbors. Here I would also like to quote a realist scholar, Dr. C. Raja Mohan. C. Raja Mohan is a very prominent scholar on Indian foreign policy, often writes in newspapers like Indian Express, and I'm sure you must have also read his editorials. C. Raja Mohan has also said that without enduring primacy in one's own neighborhood, no nation can become a credible power on the global stage. So C. Raja Mohan is here very clear in his viewpoint. He says that if you do not give importance, primary importance to your neighborhood, then you can never become a credible power at the global stage. Also, I would like to quote here our former National Security Advisor, M.K. Narayanan. M.K. Narayanan has also said something very similar. He has said that out of all the countries which are surrounding India, whether it is East Asia, Southeast Asia or West Asia, he says the most important is India's immediate neighborhood. So, our former National Security Advisor M.K. Narayanan says that the most important is India's immediate neighborhood. You must also understand here that neighborhood can be divided into different concentric circles. The immediate neighbors are the neighbors which are touching India's borders. And then you have something called extended neighborhood. Extended neighborhood is the neighbors of our neighbors. Southeast Asia is extended neighborhood, West Asia is extended neighborhood, Central Asia is extended neighborhood, or even for that matter, Indian Ocean region can be considered as extended neighborhood. But according to M.K. Narayanan, immediate neighborhood is the most important. Immediate neighborhood, according to M.K. Narayanan, would have direct impact on India geopolitically, geostrategically, and geoeconomically. M.K. Narayanan also says that whatever India may do elsewhere in the world, India's principal focus should be on its immediate neighborhood while making a foreign policy. So both M.K. Narayanan and C. Raja Mohan is trying to emphasize here that if India wants to become a credible global power, if India wants to fulfill its global aspirations, then India must give a lot of importance to its neighborhood. Also, I would like to quote here again C. Raja Mohan and S.D. Muni. S.D. Muni also is a very prominent scholar on South Asia politics. And C. Raja Mohan and S.D. Muni had recently written an article in which they had again emphasized that the objective of becoming one of the principal powers of Asia, India wants to become one of the principal powers of Asia. They say this objective can only be fulfilled if India is able to manage its own neighborhood. Again, I would like to quote here another scholar, V.P. Dutt, who is also of the view that a country's neighborhood must enjoy unquestioned primacy. That means unquestioned importance in foreign policy making. And finally, even our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the present Prime Minister, is also of the same view. Prime Minister Modi has also said that a nation's destiny is linked to its neighborhood. That is why my government has placed highest priority on advancing friendship and cooperation with her neighbors. This is what the Prime Minister Modi has also said. He has also emphasized this point. The destiny of a country, future of a country is primarily dependent on its neighborhood relationships. Therefore, he says that this government, Prime Minister Modi's government, also has been giving a lot of priority and importance to develop good cordial ties with its neighboring countries, which in fact we will study in this handout also. So this is how you can understand the relevance of India's neighborhood in its foreign policy making. There is no doubt about the fact that neighborhood policy of India will have long-lasting impact on India's global stature and can help India become a credible global power. Therefore, the cornerstones of India's foreign policy have been to build a strategically secure, politically stable, harmonious and economically cooperative neighborhood. This is how you can define the objectives of India's foreign policy as far as its neighborhood is concerned. I will break this down for you. When we say strategically secure neighborhood, this means that we must have such neighboring countries which would contribute to India's security. They should not become a threat to India's security. Instead of becoming a threat to India's security, they should contribute to India's security and make South Asia a more prosperous and a secure region. Then when we say which must have a politically stable neighborhood, this means that the countries which are surrounding India, if there's political stability, economic stability in these countries, that would help India's growth story also. That is good for the prosperity and stability of the region, and India is also bound to flourish and prosperous in such a region. You must understand this thing. At times, we behave very amateurishly. At times, we tend to celebrate the poverty and problems of our neighboring countries. Why do we do this? We try to make a comparative analysis and look at Sri Lanka. There's an economic crisis, a poor country. As compared to Sri Lanka, we are so much better. Or as compared to Bangladesh, we are so much better. Or as compared to Nepal and Bhutan, we are so much better. But we must understand that if there is any political instability or an economic crisis in our neighborhood, that will have an impact on India also, and an adversarial impact. When we tend to celebrate this, that we have poor countries surrounding us and we are better than them, we are probably doing this on basis of a false assumption. We are guilty of making a false assumption. The false assumption is that we believe that if there are problems in our neighboring countries, then these problems would remain only the problems of our neighbors and would never affect India. As if we have iron borders and the problems of neighbors can never reach India, which is entirely false assumption. You can never have iron borders. You can never isolate yourself from the problems of your neighboring countries. No country in the world has been able to do that. Even America has failed to do it. Donald Trump tried to make a wall on the Mexico border. He has miserably failed in checking illegal migration and drug trafficking from Mexico. So this doesn't work. If there would be political instability in our neighborhood, for example, return of Taliban in Afghanistan, or the deep state, the military control of Pakistan's politics, which has been affecting India's interests also, or for that matter, military rule in Myanmar, or Rohingya refugee crisis from Myanmar, or for that matter, political and economic instability in Sri Lanka, economic crisis in Sri Lanka, all of this would have an impact on India. We cannot isolate ourselves from the problems of our neighboring countries. This is something which we must understand. And we have examples of the past to help us understand this. You know very well that what has happened in the past. In the past, we have seen that there have been problems in our neighboring countries because of which India has suffered. In the 90s, one of our aircrafts, civilian aircraft, IC-814, was hijacked in 1999 and taken to Kandahar, Afghanistan. And at that point, Afghanistan was ruled by this militant organization, Taliban. Therefore, India's interests suffered at that time. We had to do a bargain with the terrorists and release Masood Azhar to get our aircraft back. The same person, Masood Azhar, has formed an anti-India terrorist organization called Jaish-e-Mohammed. Similarly, there was a huge unrest. A civil war was being fought in Sri Lanka in the 80s and the 90s because of the conflict between the majority Sinhala population and the minority Tamil population, because of which eventually India's Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated. Also, a few years ago, we had reports of killings of, ethnic cleansing of Rohingyas in Myanmar, which has triggered a refugee crisis. And we have this problem in India. Rohingyas have also been trying to migrate to India. Similarly, we have seen also instabilities in our other neighboring countries. Bangladesh, for that matter, in 1971, at that time it was East Pakistan. When the Pakistan army was trying to suppress the liberation movement in East Pakistan in 1971, we had got millions of refugees from East Pakistan. So whenever there would be problems in our neighboring countries, we are bound to suffer along with them. Therefore, it is better to have strategically secure, politically stable, harmonious and economically cooperative neighborhoods. So harmonious and economically cooperative neighborhoods, if we have such a neighborhood, that is best for India's interests. That is how India would flourish and prosper as a country. And India can fulfill its global aspirations to become a global power. But if we have troublemaking neighborhoods, then all our energies and all our resources would be wasted dealing with the problems in our neighboring countries only, because you can never get rid of your neighbors, as Atal Bihari Vajpayee had said. So if they would be stable neighborhood, then we would concentrate on our own development and on our growth, and we can shine at the global level, which would not be possible if we have troubles all around us. Therefore, it is very important to understand that for India, it is important to have a strategically secure, politically stable, harmonious and economically cooperative neighborhood. And in this, on these lines, we have seen that Indian foreign policy, India's neighborhood policy has been developed. In fact, if you compare with the earlier decades, during the Cold War era, our policy with respect to the neighborhood was based on reciprocity. We had this expectation that neighbors should reciprocate the benefits of relations with India by being sensitive to India's concerns. We always used to accept reciprocity. That means if we are doing something for our neighboring countries, if we are helping them, then they should return the favor. They should reciprocate back. But if you will have such an attitude, then a country like India would never be able to develop mutual trust and with the neighboring countries, will never be able to develop goodwill among the neighboring countries. Because India is surrounded with small neighboring countries which are anyways insecure because of India. Because India is militarily, economically, geographically much more powerful and bigger than its small neighbors, which becomes a reason for insecurity in our neighboring countries. And if we will force them that, okay, fine, we'll help you in promise of a favor which you will do for us also, reciprocity, then it doesn't create mutual goodwill, mutual trust. If you want to create mutual goodwill and mutual trust, if you want your neighbors to trust you, then you must follow the principle of non-reciprocity. This is the principle which was suggested by Gujral doctrine, I.K. Gujral, when he was the Prime Minister in the 90s. He had suggested that if we want to develop mutual trust, mutual goodwill, and a relationship of mutual benefit with our neighboring countries, then we must follow principle of non-reciprocity. And since then, we have been following principle of non-reciprocity. That means that when we help our neighbors or when we develop cordial relations with our neighbors, we do not do that on the condition that the neighbors will also have to do certain things for us or have to return the favor. Okay? That helps us create goodwill, trust in our neighborhood. Similarly, in the 90s, we had launched a Look East policy to develop good relations with Southeast Asian countries, which has now been revamped by Prime Minister Modi in the year 2014. And the successor of the Look East policy is the Act East policy. And similarly, Prime Minister Modi in the year 2014 launched a Neighborhood First policy, which is the most important policy when it comes to India's neighboring countries. Neighborhood First policy has been launched by the Modi government in order to develop good cordial ties with its neighboring countries. In fact, here in this handout, which also will be provided to you, there's a link on the video and you can download the link. Within the South Asia, Modi government has framed the Neighborhood First policy in order to develop regional connectivity, also in order to develop in order to have more attention and give more importance to neighboring countries as far as India's foreign policy is concerned. And we can see a distinct change in the approach. If you compare it with our earlier attitude of the attitude which we had during Cold War period, at that time, India used to follow a policy of strategic insulation or isolation. But that attitude has now changed, and India is now trying to develop cross-border relations with its neighbors, good cordial ties with its neighbors. And the Neighborhood First policy has been launched in order to have special focus and special intention to give special focus and special attention to our neighboring countries. With this idea in mind, the Neighborhood First policy has been launched by this particular government. And the Honorable Prime Minister Modi wants to convey this message to the neighboring countries. Then as far as India's foreign policy is concerned, the primary importance, the first importance, the priority is given to the immediate neighborhood. Therefore, this policy was launched called Neighborhood First policy. And in fact, this was launched on the first day of this government in 2014. This policy was launched on the oath-taking ceremony itself. As you all must be very well aware, when in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi was elected, on his oath-taking ceremony, all SAARC leaders were invited. This was an unprecedented event. This had never happened before. All SAARC leaders were invited to attend the oath-taking ceremony of the Prime Minister, which did lay down the foundation of the Neighborhood First policy. SAARC, I hope you are aware, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation is a regional organization of South Asia. So all leaders were invited. That laid down the foundation of the neighborhood first policy. And then first countries also which Prime Minister Modi had visited was again neighbors Bhutan and Nepal. Again in 2019, the same thing got repeated. In his second oath-taking ceremony in 2019, this time BIMSTEC leaders were invited. Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technological and Economic Cooperation. BIMSTEC leaders were invited. Also, BIMSTEC countries are also India's neighbors. BIMSTEC, majority of the BIMSTEC nations, which are members of BIMSTEC, Sri Lanka is a member, India is a member, Bangladesh is a member, Myanmar is a member, Nepal is a member, Bhutan is a member, and you have Thailand. So except Thailand, all the other neighbors are India's immediate, all the other members of BIMSTEC are India's immediate neighbors. So this time BIMSTEC leaders were invited for the oath-taking ceremony. And also the leaders of Mauritius and Kyrgyzstan representing Central Asia and Indian Ocean region, extended neighborhood of India. So this time leaders of immediate neighborhood and extended neighborhood both were invited for the oath-taking ceremony of the Prime Minister. And why did we make the shift from SAARC to BIMSTEC this time? Because probably India wanted to leave aside Pakistan. When Prime Minister Modi had been elected for the first time in 2014, he did sincerely try to pursue peace talks with Pakistan. In fact, Prime Minister Modi had visited Lahore also and had invited the Prime Minister of Pakistan in 2014 for the oath-taking ceremony. However, Pakistan has not been willing to pursue this peace, and Pakistan continues to sponsor terrorism against India, which is very evident in the form of Uri attacks, Pulwama attacks, Pathankot terror attacks. And India has fittingly responded by doing surgical strikes. Therefore, India has realized that Pakistan doesn't want to pursue peace with us. Therefore, as far as India's neighborhood policy is concerned, India has left aside Pakistan and have shifted from SAARC to BIMSTEC. Also in 2019, again, the first countries which Prime Minister Modi had visited was Maldives and Sri Lanka. During COVID also, India played a primary role in helping our neighboring countries. We gave them free vaccines under our Vaccine Maitri policy, you must be very well aware. We also formed a SAARC emergency fund. India contributed $10 million for it. We also did our Air Force and Navy did Operation Sanjeevani and Operation Sagar to send medicines, to send teams of doctors, to send test kits to our marine neighbors and to our immediate neighboring countries. And India has also been giving generous grants and lines of credit to our small neighbors to help them in their development and also help them overcome crisis. For example, recently we have been giving billions of dollars of LOCs to Sri Lanka, which has been going through economic crisis. So that is how you can understand India's neighborhood first policy. All these policy decisions which have been taken by the government in the last 7 to 8 years will help you understand the priority which we are giving to the neighboring countries as far as India's foreign policy making is concerned. I would here like to again quote few scholars regarding India's neighborhood first policy. I'd like to quote Sujan R. Chinoy. Sujan R. Chinoy is the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies Analysis. It used to be earlier called as IDSA. Now they have changed the name. The new name is Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. It's a government think tank in India. Government think tank on IR and on security policy. So as far as John Chinoy is concerned, he has also given his view on India's neighborhood policy, where he says that under India's neighborhood policy, the cooperation is based on the needs and requirements of our neighboring countries. And India is not seeking reciprocity. That means based on non-reciprocity as far as neighborhood first policy is concerned. He also says that India would prosper. India is bound to prosper if there is a prosperity in South Asia. If there is prosperity in our immediate neighboring countries, if there is prosperity in this region, that's good for the entire region, including India. And therefore, India's neighborhood first policy is following the motto of Prime Minister Modi, which is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. And Mr. Chinoy also says that the neighboring countries should also be mindful of India's key security concerns and should be sensitive about India's key security concerns. Okay, which would also include the growing role of China in our neighborhood. Then I would also like to quote here Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. I hope you are very well aware. He is the Honorable Minister of External Affairs of our country. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar has also beautifully defined India's neighborhood first policy. Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar says that the neighborhood first policy, India's neighborhood first policy means that as the biggest country of the region, we are the biggest country of the region. We say India is the biggest, economically the biggest, geographically the biggest, militarily the most powerful in South Asia. So as far as India being the biggest country in this region, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar says that we must take the lead. We must go extra mile. We must be non-reciprocal. We must be generous. And we must invest in our neighborhood. We must help our neighborhood. And he says if we will do this, then only we will be able to create an environment in which our neighboring countries would be sensitive to our core security concerns. And our core security concern is increasing role of China in our neighborhood. We would want to check that. We would want to contain that. And our neighbors would help us do that if we do all of this according to the Foreign Minister, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. He says we must take the lead, we must go the extra mile, we must be non-reciprocal, we must be generous, and we must invest in our neighborhood. This is what is neighborhood first policy defined by the minister himself. So this policy we are following for our immediate neighbors, our South Asian neighbors. And Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar has also clarified that what is the difference between Gujral doctrine and neighborhood first policy. Gujral doctrine, as I told you in the 90s, it was suggested by E.K. Gujral, the former Prime Minister of India, which was based on the principle of non-reciprocity. But he says there's a difference here. As far as Gujral doctrine is concerned, it was aimed at the entire region. Whereas a neighborhood first policy of the Modi government would keep Pakistan aside. So it has been clarified by the minister himself that a neighborhood first policy of India does not include our troublesome neighbor Pakistan, our hostile neighbor Pakistan. So this is the neighborhood first policy of India. This is the kind of policy which India is following in order to fulfill its objectives to have a strategically secure, politically stable, economically cooperative and a harmonious neighborhood. However, there must be challenges also. What are the challenges to our neighborhood first policy? The biggest challenge to our neighborhood first policy is the growing presence of China in our immediate backyard. China has been aggressively making BRI investments, Belt and Road Initiative. They have been trying to develop infrastructure in our neighborhood in the name of developing connectivity through their flagship project called Belt and Road Initiative. And these BRI investments are being made so cleverly in our neighboring countries. These are being done with the desire of ring-fencing India, encircling India in the Indian Ocean region, which can also be described as string of pearls policy of China. So this is one of our biggest headaches. The growing role of China, the growing assertiveness of China, growing presence of China in our neighboring countries. And India wants to counter that. And that is probably one of the reasons why we are giving so much of priority to our neighborhood. Recently, you must have read in the newspapers that, there's a port in Sri Lanka, Hambantota seaport, which was constructed by China under BRI. Sri Lanka got into the debt trap of China, and China has now taken over that port on a lease period for 99 years. And recently, China docked its spy ship in Hambantota. In the past, they have also docked their naval submarines in Hambantota. So this is not good for India's security, that China is having naval presence so close to our territory. So India has to counter that. This is our biggest challenge when it comes to neighborhood. Also, we can see a growth of anti-India sentiment in our neighborhood, which is rooted in the insecurity of our small neighbors. Like I told you, it is very natural. Wherever you go in the world, wherever a smaller country is existing in the company of a larger neighbor, the smaller country always feels insecure. So our small neighbors have been feeling insecure because of the presence of India, because of the presence of big India. Therefore, they have been blaming India to behave like a big brother, or even some cases as a bullying brother also. So that attitude is also there in our small neighborhoods. That also has been a big challenge for India's neighborhood policy. Lack of connectivity projects is another problem. Until unless we will not develop robust connectivity with our neighboring countries, the trade will not flourish. Integration in South Asia will not materialize. Also SARC, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, the regional organization of South Asian countries. India is also a member of that. SARC, apparent failure of SARC. SARC has failed to ensure regional integration and regional cooperation. That has also been one of the challenges. Also, we see growth of radicalization among population of our certain neighbors, like Maldives, like Bangladesh, like Afghanistan. Growth of radicalization. If radical views become more popular in our neighboring countries, if youngsters in our neighboring countries like Maldives, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, if they become victim of radicalization and extremism, that will be not good for the peace and security and stability of this region, and would also cause a adversarial impact on India's national interest and national security. Also, political instability in the neighborhood. Like I mentioned to you in this discussion itself in the beginning, that if there is political instability in our neighboring countries, that is bound to create problems for the region and also India. And we see that right now happening. For example, return of Taliban in Afghanistan can cause a very big security threat for India, is a big challenge for India, because Taliban has a history of supporting terrorist organizations, supporting anti-India terrorist organizations. Taliban also shares a good relationship with Pakistan. Pakistan's military establishment may use Taliban against India's national interest. And there is a big fear that Afghanistan ruled by Taliban may become a new home for terrorism now. And that may cause more unrest and more instability in our border areas like Kashmir. So this has been our concern. Then also rise of deep state in Pakistan. Deep state is the military establishment of Pakistan becoming more and more stronger. Also military rule in Myanmar, unrest in Myanmar, Rohingya refugee crisis in Myanmar, economic and political crisis in Sri Lanka, which you must be reading about in the newspaper on a daily basis. Sri Lanka already is in the debt trap of China, and presently being so weak, Sri Lanka is further getting trapped into that, the debt trap of China, and therefore China may start interfering in Sri Lankan affairs in a manner which may not be good for India's interests. Already we've seen an example of they docking their spy ship in Hambantota. So that is the reason why India is giving aid and grant and LOC to Sri Lanka to help them overcome this crisis, so that Sri Lanka can stabilize and also India can counter growing role of China in this island country and therefore safeguard its own interest. And also, if this political and economic crisis worsens in Sri Lanka, then we can have another refugee crisis also. 10 million refugees will start coming to India. So this political instability in our neighborhood is also one of the challenges for our neighborhood first policy. So this is how you can understand the neighborhood first policy of India and the relevance of neighborhood in India's foreign policy making. However, this discussion doesn't end here. This discussion has to continue. We must discuss bilateral relationship which India has with its neighboring countries, India-Sri Lanka relations, India-Maldives relations, India-Bangladesh relations, Nepal relations, Bhutan relations, India-Afghanistan, India-Pakistan, with all the South Asian countries. But obviously, when I see you in the classroom, when you come here and join us in our classroom, we will definitely do that with those discussions. We will continue this discussion further, and one by one we'll pick up all these countries and discuss the bilateral relationship which India has with these countries, and what are the opportunities and what are the challenges and what are the areas of cooperation which are there. So I hope this particular discussion has benefited all of you, and the purpose of the discussion has been to help you understand the relevance and also help you understand that how do we deal with such topics in our classrooms. Such kind of notes are shared with our students, and I hope to see you in our classrooms where we will continue this discussion further. And similar notes will be provided to all of you, and so that you can best prepare for the exam and ace the exam. PSIR, as you all must be very well aware, is one of the most scoring optionals in UPSC. And your probability to succeed exponentially increases if you take up optional subjects like PSIR. So I hope the discussion has benefited. Thank you so much, students. I'll see you in the classroom. Thank you, everybody.